May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our heart be always found acceptable in thy sight, Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. Good morning. Good morning. And once again, I want to express my appreciation to all those who have allowed this service to be a commemoration of how we worship God at any age, including the age of youth. I want to thank John Murdoch for putting together some hymns that call attention to the fact that we're all in this together, regardless of our ages. I want to thank Lisa Rose for all of the work that she has done, and of course all those of you that are actual participants in this service this morning. We are very, very blessed and fortunate to have such a wonderful group of youth. Presently, we have been very, very blessed ever since I've been at St. Matthias by having terrific kids in this congregation. Just wonderful. And I'm sure that we will continue to be blessed in years to come. If I had my choice today, I would actually preach on the first reading, which is from the book of Job. You know, the book of Job is so fascinating because it's as relevant to us today in terms of the questions that it asks as it was at the time it was written. It was probably the very first piece of the Hebrew sacred writings. And it came from a question that not only the Jewish people asked, but the people who would not even call themselves Jews. And that question is, how does God allow suffering to come into the world? How does, in Jewish language, how does a loving, unified God allow suffering and evil to be present in the world? And the book of Job is kind of an answer to that. And it's interesting that it's not a definitive answer by any means. At the end of the book of Job, for those of you that have read it or want to read it, God challenges Job basically to know who he is in relationship to the divine, and leaves it at that. For those of you that want some fascinating spiritual reading this week, I would strongly recommend that you read for the first time or reread the book of Job. It is an absolutely fascinating reading. But I'm not going to preach on that. Instead, I'm going to pick up on what Donald C. Williams got us started on last Sunday, which is our stewardship of time, talent, as well as treasure. And Donald, again, I want to thank you for that wonderful, wonderful homily that you gave us at both services last Sunday. I thought it was superb. It was the second time I heard him speak on that topic. The first time was with the Stewardship Commission. And I was inspired by what Donald had to say. And last Sunday, I was equally inspired to the point of seeing stewardship as primarily an act of the Spirit. The generosity, whether it's of time or talent or of our money, or any of that, is primarily motivated by our spirituality. It's not a question of how much money we make. If that were the case, then Jesus would not have blessed the widow who gave of her mite, but would have blessed those rich people who gave just a smattering of their total wealth. You see, generosity has to emanate from the Spirit, and if we allow that to germinate in our beings, then what we find is something fascinating that occurs within us. And that is, as Donald said so eloquently last Sunday, we enter into a realm of being that would otherwise not be present in our consciousness. And that realm of being is called the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of heaven. And in the Wednesday curriculum, we're studying a book by Marcus Bohr called Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time. A kind of clever title. But what Marcus Bohr says is that Jesus' primary mission in life was to allow people the chance to enter into this realm of being that is sometimes called the kingdom of God, sometimes called the kingdom of heaven, but which transforms us, which makes us newly born. If you want to be a reborn Christian, you have to enter into this kingdom that Jesus is so concerned about. And generosity, I think, is one of the ways to do it. Generosity of time, talent, and money. The amazing thing about it is that at our core, I think we're defined more by our spirituality than we are by our physicality. That's why you seldom see movie stars in movies beyond the age of 25 or 30. The physical stuff will all go away. It's the spiritual aspect that Jesus himself was so concerned about. And in that respect, we are primarily spiritual entities, living our lives out for a short period of time, actually, here on the face of the earth, in a physical body. And yet most of us spend our time in almost direct in proportion to reality. We spend our time so much more concerned about what I would call the kingdom of earth than we do the kingdom of heaven that we miss the point. And the only factor within us that knows the difference and craves to be heard is our soul. Our individual soul that I believe is pliable. I believe that as we're open to the kingdom of God, as we become, as Donald so eloquently made a point for last Sunday, as we become more open to acts of generosity, that our souls actually enlarge. They get bigger. And that our spirits expand and we become more like what God made us to be in the first place, which is in God's image and likeness. That we become more human as our souls expand. Now, it might take people a long time to discover that reality. It may be that we have to go through different stages in our lives. And it may be that as a child, we simply can't understand that phenomenon. But certainly, as we age, it begins to dawn upon us that there's something more to life. There's something much more at stake and even much more serious about our living here on the face of the earth than we first thought. And in Jesus' life, I think what he says is that basically you better pay attention to the moving of the Spirit in your life in order to enter into the kingdom of God. And the way to do that is to be generous with your time, with your talent, and with your treasure, with your money. So, in Wednesday's Kerygma class that met in Morrison Hall and was really well attended, we had a very lively discussion and something that grabbed everybody's attention, including mine, about what it means to enter into the kingdom of God. For that brief period of an hour and a half to 2 hours, I felt in that room in Morrison Hall a sense of authenticity amongst people. We were allowing ourselves to lead with the Spirit that was in each of us, and it was magnificent. That's what Donald was talking about when he's saying that stewardship is ultimately an entering into a whole new realm of being, where you're really honest and really in touch with yourself and really mature. It was an amazing discussion. And for myself, there is no question in my mind that that was Jesus' primary mission in life, was to say to people, wake up. There's so much more to enjoy and to reap and to benefit from in life here on earth than you're extracting, that you're aware of. And it's all here and it's all around us. That's the good news of what Jesus did and why he's, I think, the most significant single entity who ever walked on the face of the earth. Jesus' message is still being unfolded and realized, even if it's gradually realized by all of us, even the most sophisticated and learned, as well as those who are raised in situations where they have little or no formal education. There's something about the way that Jesus conducted himself that allows us to extrapolate something more and more and more and more until we finally say yes, 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 and yes, even more. That's why people like Thomas Cannon, you know who he was? He was a member of the city of Richmond and a postal clerk who gave away all of his money as a post office person, gave away all of his money to people that needed it. It was the most generous example that we have of a Richmonder, I think, in the history of the city of Richmond. People are still talking about him and writing about him in the newspaper because he was the most authentic human being. And he died of poverty. So it's not about money. It's not about fame and fortune. When we talk about stewardship, it's about life. It's about wanting to live so much that almost nothing else matters. And when you want to live in the kingdom of God, then ironically everything comes to life and everything matters. And you become alive and human again. That's why it's to your benefit and to my benefit to be generous, to cultivate that way of being, is to enter into the kingdom of God and be transformed. Now I know that it's very difficult because I think Jesus was talking about that, and yet we spend so much of our time, especially in stewardship campaign moments, talking about paying the light bills, or paying off the mortgage, or having a beautiful place in which to worship. And on Wednesday at the curriculum class, I thought to myself, our discussion is right on target. We're entering into the kingdom of God. And yet, at the same time, this conversation probably would not have taken place had we not given an awful lot of time and energy and attention over the years to build something like Morrison Hall, or to build something like this church. You wouldn't be hearing me today in at least quite the same way were it not for some kind of attention that we need to give to the institution of the church. That's not to say that Jesus' primary mission was to build up this great big institution that called attention to Jesus. I don't believe that, and neither should you. If you worship the church itself, you're worshiping a false god. But by the same token, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. By the same token, let's be realistic about who we are as human beings and say there is no other place that I know of where a conversation like we had at Kerygma last Wednesday could have taken place in the modern world in which we live. I don't know of a single teacher who would say that they could teach in a classroom what we're talking about in a Wednesday curriculum class. A teacher in Chesterfield County just simply can't do that. I don't know of any business that says to its employees, okay, now, as part of our workday, we're going to have a spiritual discussion. In fact, I'll tell you a story that happened to me, a true story. I went to high school with a lot of gifted young men. And many of them in the city of Detroit worked for the automotive industry. And so one of my high school classmates rose in the ranks of General Motors. In fact, he headed up the Humvee division. And I made an appointment with him as an adult when we lived in Michigan, and I said to him at that time, as he kind of looked out over the grandeur of the corporate offices of General Motors, I said, Mike, would you entertain an idea to have a kind of chaplain on staff here at the corporate headquarters of General Motors in order to be with people and talk with them about maybe some kind of spiritual issue that has come up in their lives? And he said, no, I'm not willing to do that. He said, we're a business. And if people want to hear about that, then they can join a church somewhere. Well, I wonder if that was a kind of pre-statement to the way of how not to conduct business. But it also made me aware of the fact that outside of churches, outside of organized religion, as much as we can point fingers and say we fall short of the mark, there isn't a place for church life. Because it's the only place I know of where we allow discussions of the Spirit. It's the only place I know of where we actually advocate the growth of the soul in a healthy, constructive, and positive way. We're going to hear from our youth in just a second, and I think one of the things that they're going to say is that in schools, when they attend classes, it's not in vogue to go into discussions about their spirituality. And so that's where we kind of live, in that tension between saying, you know, the kingdom of God is what it's all about. And so therefore, when we give, we enter into the kingdom of God. And on the other hand, saying, but I need to be able to have a place that is safe, that is free of anxiety, where I can express my spirituality in all of its aspects. I can express my fears and doubts about God, as Job did. And I can express my insights about the nature of God. And I can express my faith in God. And I can express the fact that God being in my life has made all of the difference in the world for me. Now you can do that in a church setting. And that's why I would urge you to be generous to St. Matthias in the pledge. I believe very strongly in you people. I believe in this congregation and have from the time I came here. It is the finest congregation of people I have ever served. And I continue to believe that. So be generous. I like you because of your generosity of spirit. Imagine all of the good that we did just last night as it got dark and we were celebrating together as a people of God. Celebrating pig roast, celebrating one another's lives, celebrating raising money for specific causes like the Fine Arts program. Don't ever take that for granted. Your generosity of time, talent, and money makes a huge difference not only in your lives, but in the lives of your children and of your friends and family here at St. Matthias. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's a step in that hierarchy of needs that I think brings us to St. Matthias and allows us to feel the presence of God, and that is a sense of belonging, a sense of love for one another, in spite of our foibles. Of course we fall short of the mark. What else do you expect? But we're here. And we're expressing in ways perhaps that don't quite meet God's standards, but they're the best we can do. We're here because we love God. And we love one another. And in so doing, we are transformed. So give. and give generously. I'll say a word or two about the logistics of all of this. In the mail, by now, we should have received a stewardship letter from St. Matthias. It articulates both kind of the theory of belonging and believing, as well as the needs at St. Matthias, and it includes a pledge card. You fill out your pledge card after much prayer, and I would strongly urge you to pray, and thought, and I would strongly urge you to give it a lot of thought. Meditative thought, realistic thought. And you can fill out that pledge card and either put it back in the mail, it can be delivered by U.S. Postal Service, or you can bring it to the church during working hours, or you can drop it in your home space at the time of the offertory here at the Sunday service. And I would like to call upon Lisa Rose right now, who has some of our youth who are prepared to also talk about the importance of generosity